my wife got rear-ended in her car there, and she's fine. But we had to get a rental car while it gets fixed. And so I dropped the car off at the body shop. I go to the rental car company, and they're like, all we got today is I was like, something mid-sizes for my wife. Yeah. She doesn't like driving a big car. Something smallish to mid-size, whatever you got. Car. And they're like, well, we've got a Ford Explorer or a Suburban. And I was like, what? How is that? Those are the options?
A Suburban.
So I had not, and I'm the one taking a tour, I had not driven a Ford Explorer in 30 years. Just for comparison, the last time I drove a Ford Explorer was the size that they were when they came out with Jurassic Park. Remember when that was the official Jurassic Park car? They were like...
Back in 93.
Yeah, the 93 car. That's right. Yes. So way to age me. That's great. So the Explorers now are gigantic. This thing was a beast. It is not a small car to drive. And so I looked it up, and it has gained 14 inches since 1993.
Wow.
Which, in terms of length, is a lot, but it also feels wider and higher. Like the hood is gigantic. Yeah. It's like driving a big old tank. I don't know what to do with this thing.
I'm not comfortable driving something that big. I'm really not. Like when we went to that Schultz Museum show, and they got us a Toyota Tacoma to drive around, I was really uncomfortable behind the wheel of that because it just felt like you were driving a tank, and also just living in Philadelphia for so long, I wouldn't want to have a car like that just because you can never find a place big enough to park it.
Yeah, I know. That's the thing is LA is the same way. Is you spend a good 40% of your driving life trying to find parallel parking in LA. Good luck with this thing. Jeez Louise, it's like 200 inches of vehicle you got to figure out where to park. I don't know.
And then it can't be a very fast vehicle. And like parking is one thing, but after I bang the hell out of the bumpers in front of and behind me trying to get out of a parking place, I need to move fast.
It's true. I gotta get the hell out of there. All right, hello everybody. I am Dave Kellett, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making comics
and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Guigar, the editor of the Webcomics Handbook on Substack and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal, as mentioned. I'm the cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and the co-director of Stripped.
And this week's hour of comics advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. We've got a couple of questions that have come in over at patreon.com/comiclab and a topic or two that Brad and I want to bring into the show. Mm-hmm. So the first one, though, is a question that has come in across the transom, and I'm going to read this one off to Brad. It says, hey, Brad and Dave, quick backstory, quick question. I am one half of a comic creating team, and we are 1 year into a contract with our first publisher. While we have no solid complaints, we are curious if they are holding up their end of the publisher/creator relationship. The issue causing us concern is that we see no promotion from them for the books we create, beyond occasionally sharing one of our social media posts on their feeds. While we can't blame our comics' low sales entirely on the lack of publicity, we are confident it doesn't help. So the question, are we expecting too much out of our publisher, or are they not following through with their end of the arrangement? The purpose of asking this now is we're developing a new series and looking at our options for getting it out into the world. Stick with our current publisher, ? Find a new one, ? Or just doing it all on our own? I bet I know which direction you gents will advise. Thanks, guys. Love the show and all the knowledge you share. So, Brad, boy, is this question right up our alley.
Wow.
A publisher not doing something that they're traditionally a publisher was key in doing. How do we feel about that, Brad?
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love the whole crux of this is, hey, you know what? We found out publishers aren't all they cracked up to be, and our big question is, who should we sign with next? It's just, and we're gonna write into the guys that have done 350 shows publicly, 350 more on Patreon, that all have said you don't need a publisher. Except for a couple of very specific caveats. And they're going to ask what we think about this. This is great. I can't imagine they're going to be surprised. So let's take the first part of that question and handle it really quickly, because obviously you're asking us a question that we don't know the answer to, but it sure sounds like you know the answer to it already. So your question, are we expecting too much out of our publisher, or are they not following through with their end of the agreement? We don't know, because we don't know who your publisher is. We don't know what your agreement was. We don't know what they did, what they didn't do, but it sure sounds like you do know the answer to that question already. You can look at your, and by the way, here's one thing, just as long as we're talking about this, go back and look in your contract and ask and under the part where you cover promotion, hopefully there's a part that covers promotion in your contract. How is that delineated? In other words, what did they agree to do in the contract to promote this book?
Right.
And then if they didn't do the things that they said they were going to do, then they let you down. But if it was never in the contract in the first place, if they didn't have any and more importantly, if you didn't insist on a granular level of you are going to do this, this, and this, you're going to take out ads and here, and here, you're going to pay for that, that, and that. If you didn't insist on that in the contract, it is not the publisher's fault. Find a mirror, take a good look in the mirror and say, I need to be better the next time I've got a contract in front of me, if I get that far.
Yeah, this is a bit of a leap, but you know how that old saying of OSHA regulations are written in blood?
Yeah.
So for those not familiar or outside of the U.S., OSHA is what, Occupational Safety and Health Administration?
Yep.
It's basically the U.S. federal government department that handles safety at the workplace.
Yes.
And the idea is all these workplace regulations are written by the past person having cut off a finger or lost an arm or been decapitated by this machine, right? And so OSHA regulations are written in blood. And a lot of contracts are written, and your own experience, your future contracts will be written in blood based on how it burned you the last time, right?
Yeah.
And so some of this, to Brad's point, might just be you just didn't think about promotion when you were looking at this contract. You were probably excited that someone said, yes, I get that as an artist. I also understand the idea of like the joy that someone wanted to bring your book into the world. That's, of course, exciting. But right now, unfortunately, you're feeling the sting of not having probably looked through with a fine-tooth comb what the contract required of you and what it required of them. And by the way, I'm not judging you on that. I had the same thing happen to me on the first 3, 4, 5 contracts because I didn't know, hey, you got to ask for X, Y, Z if you're going to do this. Or, hey, you gotta demand that this kind of thing is going to happen if this event gets triggered, right? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So all of which to say, I agree with Brad on the idea that, listen, it might not have been in the contract at all. They might not be dropping the ball. My guess is it's not in the contract.
Oh,
a lot of these.
I'd eat my hat if it was any other way.
Yeah, smaller publishers are very unlikely to sort of delineate what they have to do promotionally. And even the bigger contracts, I don't know that they would call themselves out unless you asked it or you or your agent asked it of them to call out what they were going to do. And here's the big picture thing, is that in the 50s, 60s, 70s, publishers did a lot in terms of marketing and sales. They had to because that was the bread and butter of their business, right? Now, all those departments have been shrunk down to one person, or the one person that's doing marketing is also doing the print management and also doing the distribution management. Yeah. It's just Sally. She's the one person handling all the things because the only person that survived the layoffs. And it's kind of reduced down to you are the marketing team, which is not an accident why a lot of publishers go with people with huge social media feeds, because they're like, well, that covers that checkbox. Let's hire them. So all of which to say is, in one more checkbox in our long list of why publishers might not work for you is that the promotion is no greater, as you've found, than you doing it yourself. Right. How hard was it to put your thing in their feed? It took 2 seconds. It cost them nothing. They spent nothing on it in terms of labor or effort or blood, sweat, or treasure, right? It was a click. they're not doing promotion. And so you have to ask yourself, and this is a heart-to-heart with yourself, why did you go with a printer and a publisher? Right. Most likely, as Brad has said, it was for, in the past, it was for vanity issues. You were excited that somebody was ready to publish your work, right?
Yeah.
It didn't matter at that point in your mind. It didn't matter if there was money in it. It didn't matter if there was promotion in it. It was a vanity thing. And that's okay. That's a human response to someone saying, I like you. It's like, oh, hooray. You know, yeah. So now you're at the far end of it, though. You have learned a couple of lessons from it. As I said about OSHA regulations, your next thing could be written in blood in terms of like what stung on this one. Yeah. And you have to genuinely ask yourself, do you want to go back to a publisher again? Because what did they bring you? They didn't bring you marketing. They didn't bring you the idea or the work of art itself. You brought that to the table. So what they did do most likely is bring, if it was a floppy, they brought $1,000 to the table. If it was a graphic novel, they brought $5,000 to $10,000 to the table. They got it printed. And they happen to know one or two emails to reach out to for distributors. Okay, you can figure all of that out yourself with a little bit of time and effort. And you can kickstart. So what are we doing on some level, you know?
Yeah, and just to bring that contract to a fine point, you go back and look through that contract that they give you. There's certain parts of it that I'm sure get very granular. Like you've got to do certain things. Every part of the expectations from both sides are laid out in there. So even if they said to you in an email or in person, oh, yeah, we're going to promote your book. We're really excited and we've got all these great ideas. None of that matters. That all belongs in the contract. And if it's not there, then you signed a bad deal. And you, like Dave says, you've got to learn about that, because if it's not listed in the contract, then it's not, you can't count on it happening. So now we get to the second part of the question that Dave very rightly brings up. Why would you want to sign with a publisher again, right? None of the stuff that they've done for you is stuff that you couldn't figure out in an afternoon, right? And Dave, I don't know, floppies? I hope we're not talking floppies. That's a part of the industry that we've kind of moved past a long time ago. The idea of trying to put floppies out and building an audience and then turning that into a graphic novel, putting it through to a distributor, to comic shops, taking pennies on the dollar on that. Let's hope it's not floppies. Let's hope that these people
I just was saying floppies in terms of like, here's what they probably spent, like $1,000 or so to print a floppy or
if that. But also like who's out there audience building with floppies? I don't see it. I do see a lot of people building an audience, doing a Kickstarter and then putting floppies out. I see that business model, and I see some people doing it very, very well, where they're kickstarting it with their own audience. And then once they put out a few floppies, then they're turning those into graphic novels. I get that. But if you're trying to build an audience in comic shops, I'm sorry, it's the year 2024. We've seen comic shops steadily decline for a long time now. That's another thing that if your publisher's making that decision, that's another reason that Dave and I are going to warn you off of publishers, because it's not a great business model, at least not in my opinion. But yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Well, I was just going to say, just to remind people where we tend to come down. And by the way, all of this is said with love, because we get it. We get the impetus to go with a publisher, because the default is, well, like, surely they know what they're doing compared to me, not necessarily. Right. And surely they have assets that I don't have, not necessarily, as you're seeing from promotion. But we do delineate a couple of places where it's still worthwhile to go with publishers. Who is that? It's when you have a kid's book or a YA novel, because dear God, is it hard to reach those. It's nigh impossible to reach those audiences online, as it should be. And then the other time, and I think this is just me that delineates this one out, is that unlike Brad, I say, if you're only in your life ever going to do one book, sure, go with the publisher. Then you don't have to deal with it. You're basically just wanting to get the book out in the world. That's fine. But if you're wanting to build a career in this and wanting to build an income that's bigger than pennies on the dollar, honest to God, self-publishing is a much better way to go. Brad put this years ago, that it used to be that self-publishing was, quote unquote, vanity press, because you had to be super vain to want to get this book out, and regardless if anyone rejected it or ever accepted it. But now, the way Brad's formulated it, and I might as well just let him talk to it, is that Vanity Press is what now?
Vanity Press is now social. It's gone completely the other way around. Publishing is now Vanity Press. It just is because of the things that Dave has said, right?
Right, because there's no necessarily there's no money in it,
right?
But there is the stroke to the ego of like, well, I'm with a publisher, you know what I mean? And so that's what I always thought that was a really smart formulation on Brad's part, is that Vanity Press has flipped on its head now.
And so that's what we're going to obviously, and you knew this when you wrote into the show. At least I hope you did.
No, they did. They finished their question jokingly saying that. We're going to encourage you to self-publish, and what that means is to build your own audience online on your own website, on your own social media. In other words, not building it on Webtoons or Tapas or some other big umbrella comic site that might be out there. Build your audience, build a direct connection to them, build your own social media. And then when you're ready for a book, again, I'm going to try to dissuade you from floppies, because I think it's going to be a lot better for your experience and better for your business to put out a graphic novel, a little bit better quality book, a little bit better quality paper, and obviously a more big story swing for you than what you can get in a 22-page comic book. A little bit more story. Give yourself a chance to make a connection with the reader with more pages and more story. I'm gonna really encourage you to consider this as a graphic novel project, just in general. And then when you're ready, when you've done the work, and it is work of building your audience, then put that Kickstarter out, and then it becomes market research. Are you ready for the market? Is the market ready for you? It's free market research. If the answer is no, that's fine. Take that information and use it in a constructive way. Absolutely. And I will say one thing better. Let's look on the positive of what's come out of this, too, is that you can also, now going into your own self-publishing route, as Brad says, hopefully for a larger graphic novel, you can take all the stuff that you saw the publisher do and do it yourself.
Yeah.
You've seen up close that they did X when Y was a prompt. They did B when A was a prompt. And so you can also say, hey, where did this book get printed? And just ask them, like, where did they get printed? Okay, note that down. Contact them yourself for the next book. You know what I mean?
Yes.
You can start using, you have now a small leg up, even with distribution. Should you want to go that route, I don't recommend it, but should you want to go that route, they know your other book that was released already. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is you can find a small silver lining to having gone with a publisher, because maybe you will have gleaned a few tips and tricks from working with them by seeing what they did when certain stages came in terms of release, in terms of publicity, in terms of promotion, in terms of distribution. You might have learned a few things from them here and there. And that's great. That's the kind of thing you want to do in the overarching branch of your career, is to learn a little bit from every stage, and even the mistake stage like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And as far as putting your book into distribution, I can't make that decision for you. I can tell you what I decided, and that was when I created an Advantage Amazon account to put my books out onto Amazon. Took me an afternoon to do all the paperwork, as it were, to file everything.
Right.
Once I got an open avenue to post my books and my ebooks on Amazon, boom. That's distribution. That's where most of the people are buying their books is through Amazon.com. So once I had my books up on Amazon, I stopped worrying a lot about distribution, because that's distribution. That's where everybody, for the most part, is buying their books. I don't put my books out through Diamond Distribution to get into comic shops. I really don't. I've done it in the past. It's a huge headache. The paper, the accounting that you get back from them is nightmarish, or at least it was back when I was doing it.
It's also 1970s accounting. It's like, what are we doing here with these weird spreadsheets that are hand collated? And you're like, what's going on here?
Like back when I was doing it, it looked like it came off a dot matrix printer, the kind that you tore off the little strips of paper with the holes in it. I'm sure. Hopefully, they've gotten better since then. But it was not a net positive for my business. It was not propelling me forward. So once I did a Kickstarter and got my books into the hands of the people who wanted it, of course, remember, the whole idea of the Kickstarter is not necessarily just to get the book into the hands of the people who want it. The idea of a Kickstarter is to do that and have a few hundred left over so that you can put them into sales in different ways through Amazon, through comic conventions, if you're going to go that route, through direct sales on your online store, all of those things. That's really how you build a career in comics today. By and large, I mean, yes, there are some outliers who've gone different routes. There are some people like Dave points out doing young adult stuff that and kids stuff that is they have to go a completely different path. And that's perfectly fair. But for the most part, the people who are building their careers in comics, you're going to look and see an awful lot of people who do very close to what I just outlined.
Yeah. And to put this into sort of a visual metaphor, because sometimes it's helpful to see how it sounds to Brad and I when we describe it a different way, is it feels a little bit like you're asking this question saying, hey, Brad and Dave, I have this cooking colander that doesn't seem to hold water, this blue cooking colander. It doesn't seem to hold water. But if I buy a red cooking colander, surely that will hold water, right?
Yeah.
And we're like, what? No, the thing that you are describing or asking us to do doesn't do that thing anymore. And publishers, for the most part, don't do promotion anymore. They don't market. They don't build an audience for you in a way that you couldn't necessarily do for yourself. Or if they do it using the same damn tools that you're going to be using with your self-publishing career.
Not only that, but I just as a quick tangent before we go to our next question, I've started to seriously question whether some of these publishers or even like press agencies are using AI because here's what I'm saying. I've gotten a flood of interview requests for this show, for ComicLab, that want us to promote their book. And every one of them feels very much like it's being generated by an AI in the way it's written. And also, it's the fact that we don't do book promotion on this show. We do very few interviews and we don't do any book promotion. Nobody comes on this show, hardly at all, maybe with one or two exceptions out of 700 episodes total.
Yeah.
Have come up and talked, said, here's my Kickstarter. Oh, here's where you can buy my book, something like that.
Right.
And what that tells me is that there's not a real person on the other end of that email, because a real press agent, a real public relations person would have spent 5 seconds to listen to the show or to look at the show or to listen to the trailer that we have up on every podcast outlet, listen to the show and say, oh, that's not that kind of show at all. But because it has the word comic in it, some AI is grabbing that and say, oh, these guys do a show about comics. They'll be happy to promote our Kickstarter. And as a result, I think a lot of this stuff that we're getting and what a lot of these publishers may also be doing is all AI. There's not a person behind it. They just flag that term. And now I'm getting these requests for Kickstarters that are like, we don't do that. All you got to do is listen to 5 minutes of this show. And, we don't do that. Yeah.
In general, my opinion of publicists in the world of comics has been pretty low. So even if they have listened to it, they're usually just pretty daft in terms of who does what and what goes where. And, I mean, it's sort of email blasted out. But anyway, let's jump into our next question over at patreon.com/ComicLab. And this comes in from Kel, and Kel writes, hi, Brad and Dave. I've been fiddling with comics as a hobby for over a decade, and now I've got it into my head that I want to try an illustrated novel. I was wondering if I wanted to build a career for illustrated novels, would the same advice be given on ComicLab still apply, or would it be better to find a publisher? Oh, sorry, I didn't see that coming. Specifically, the advice about posting for free on my website until I've built an audience, then monetizing with sites like Patreon and Kickstarter. My main worries are, number one, illustrated novels aren't nearly as popular as comics. Number 2, I'm not sure people would even want to read them on a website or a phone. Thanks in advance. Love listening to you guys every week. I link of you as Car Talk for Comics, says Kel. By the way, that's something we get a lot, and I don't hate it. I do not hate the comparison to Car Talk. That's great.
The only thing I don't like about it is I wonder, like, if there's going to be a generational gap there pretty soon, because I don't know if you're under 20 years old or under 30 years old, you remember that show, but it really was kind of a high watermark in radio, their show.
Can I ask you, does it even still air on NPR or anything?
I don't think it airs on NPR. You can get the best of Car Talk on Spotify. And I subscribe to that feed, and I listen to it every now and again when I've got a car trip, because it'll make an hour go by like that.
That's correct. You know what? Okay. While we're on the topic, just for a brief second, I watched, because there's a whole, I guess there's a whole streaming thing for Bob Ross.
Yeah.
And we all know what Bob Ross is. We get it. We get the idea. Yeah. But when was the last time you actually sat and watched a full episode of Bob Ross, Brad?
Oh, decades.
Okay, so I kind of recommend it. I was like you. I hadn't watched one in decades. Holy shit, do they hold up? Bob Ross is fantastic. He is great. Wow. The whole time he's like, it's. I know it's cliche to say at this point, but he's like, all right, well, that was a mistake. And you know what? Mistakes happen. And sometimes we just got to work them into our work. And I'm like, you go, Bob Ross. You go. Anyway, so I enjoyed the hell out of Bob Ross. So now to Kel's question. All right, so illustrated novels. Brad, I turn this to you. Does our advice still hold for self-distributing it and then going through Patreon and Kickstarter? Or is this a unique case, i.e., like we say with young adult novels and kids novels, that kind of thing?
So here's the thing. I want Kel to go back and listen to a Pro Tips episode. It was number 347. How to get the most out of ComicLab. And I felt silly pitching that as a show topic when I did. Like, hey, here's how to listen to our show. Right. But I really want you to listen to our instructions on how to listen to our show, because the main point we made there is everything that we say applies directly to you. And again, if there's a caveat, if there's an exception, we'll point it out immediately, like young adult graphic novels. We'll point it right out. But everything we say applies to you. And the problem that we have with a lot of our listeners is they're convinced that they're a special case. Oh, yeah, Brad, we know what you say about comics, but I'm special. I need special. It's like if you were an ice cream maker and we said, here's how you market ice cream and sell it on the market. This is our advice for our ice cream. And you came in and said, but listen, I make Rocky Road ice cream. I'm a special little ice cream maker over here, and you can't give me the same instructions as you do for Black Raspberry. That's a completely different type of
Brad, you don't know nothing. That's a whole different world, Brad.
So yes, Kel, like I can confidently say every last thing that we say on this show applies directly to you. Now you're getting it. Let's talk about something that I can really identify with: imposter syndrome. In other words, you say, my main worries are illustrated novels aren't nearly as popular as comics. I don't know where you're getting those numbers. I don't care where you're getting those numbers. Here's what I know beyond a shadow of a doubt. If it's good, they'll read it. You know why I know that? There was this illustrated novel that came out a few years ago. And it keeps getting pointed to as a comic. It's not. It's an illustrated novel. It was called Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Have you ever heard of it? So did every other.
I've heard of the seventh house that he bought with it. Yes.
Yeah, that's one of those illustrated novels that's not as popular as comics. Here's the point, Kel. If it's good, they'll read it.
Yeah.
So instead of worrying about whether there's the same number of fans in illustrated novels as there is in comics, your worry should be, how am I going to make this good? By the way, if it sounds familiar, it's another theme that we've been saying for 350 some episodes, or we're going to be saying for another 350 some more. If it's good, they'll read it. I'm not even sure people want to read it on a website or a phone. Cal, if it's good, they'll read it. Your job is to make it good. All these, and I'm saying this with love in my heart for you, because I get it. You're all wrapped up around this stuff, and you're full you're not sure of yourself. You've got confidence issues maybe regarding this. I'm going to ask you to clear all of that away. Here's what you need to do. Take that illustrated novel idea of yours and you do it to the absolute best. Pour every bit of your passion into it and take all those worries and put it aside, because it's side stuff. It's side matter. It doesn't matter. Your job is to make that so good that it doesn't matter whether it's a comic or an illustrated novel or you did it on the back of Matchbox covers that people got to drive 10 miles to go read. If you do it good enough, people will read it no matter what it is. That's your job. Make it good.
Yeah. And I will say, had you asked me 15, 20 years ago, could an illustrated novel work online? I might have agreed with you, Kel. I might have.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what's really put that up as a lie is the existence of Substack recently, where people are climbing over each other to subscribe and pay for written content, short form, long form, medium form, extended form in terms of like a Sherlock Holmes periodical or episodic. People love it. And so, like Brad said, if it is good, if it comes from a place of originality and with passion, you'll find your tribe out there in terms of the audience that also is like, this is what I've been looking for. I've been looking for an illustrated novel that does X, Y, Z, and this does exactly that. And so I think Brad hits it right on the head. It's write to your passion, write what makes you excited, not what you think the market will want. I mean, keep the market in mind, but write for you first, but with the market in mind. And I think there is a very strong potential through Substack and through Patreon to do it on an episodic basis. And then a couple years from now, collect it together as a 150 to 300 page book and put it out as a Kickstarter. I think that's a very viable path.
Yep. I'm gonna bring this topic to a close by one more thing that we say on this show all the time, but I'm gonna say it one more time so you hear it. Your concern was, I don't think the market for illustrated novels is as big as for comics. Remember what we tell you constantly on this show. You never measure an audience by the people. You measure by the passion. I will take a small, passionate audience.
That's how I make my living. Yeah.
And do wonderful things with them. A small number of people who are really into what I'm doing. That's the golden key right there. That's the brass ring. I will take that over several tens of thousands. And by the way, I don't know that this metaphor exactly works, but take a look at talking about somebody who's got tens of thousands of followers on social media and for any number of reasons cannot convert that into anything meaningful, right? I'll take a small, like Dave's got with both of his comics, a smaller, passionate group of people. You can do great things with that. You don't measure an audience by the people, you measure them by the passion.
Yeah. And honestly, I've said this before, but I try to reach 100,000 people so that I can entice 10,000 people so that I can get 1,000 people to jump in on a drive book, right? Yeah. And you're like, geez, 1,000 people, but I can build a career and have built a career. 15 years of doing drive now, and I'm going to do 15 more years. I don't know how long, but anyway, the point being is that what a lovely life. I have no boss. I have no publisher or editor. I have no one telling me what I can or can't write. It is a joy-filled existence. And it's like I said, like Brad said, the passion is there, not the power of the size of the audience. It's the passion that drives it. And so I will take my 1,000 drive readers any day of the week that come hell or high water to support the story. And I absolutely love it. And here's the sort of connecting tissue from both of these, both in terms of an illustrated novel and who it would appeal to and how would you reach them. And the previous one of like a publisher who may not be servicing you. But by God, I'm going to go with a second publisher, is that both of these are operating from a place of fear. And that's understandable from an artist standpoint. They're both operating from a place of fear. It's like, oh, well, thank God. Here's one place where maybe I could have, any port in a storm. And I'm so nervous as an artist and I just need someone who will believe in me and do the thing. The thing is, if you believe in yourself and the story, honest to God, as Brad and I have said, you will find solutions to problems as they come up in your self-publishing. Does it mean there's work? Absolutely. Does it mean that there's going to be all sorts of headaches? Absolutely. But you will be the passionate one behind it. You don't need some third party confirming it for you. That then takes an ungodly amount of the profit. I mean, just by comparison, for me to make a living, like I said before, I need about 1,000 drive readers to really go all in on a drive book. comparatively, if I went with a publisher where I'm getting somewhere around $1 a book, I need 100,000 people to jump in on that, which means the marketer has to reach out to 500,000 people. So it's a harder road in this world of to have a publisher involved and make a living on it.
Yeah.
So I just can't say enough good things about the self-publishing round. I just feel like in my heart of heart, it's the way to go.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
Dave, we've got an update for today's show, and it's one that I'm kind of excited about. Marvel and DC have lost their trademark over the word superhero. Have you heard about this?
Yes, I did. And this is, so just a little background on my personal life. I used to work for Mattel Toys in El Segundo, and Mattel has the largest library of owned trademarks in the United States, oddly enough. And so we had really good trademark attorneys and a couple of good patent attorneys, but a really good trademark group. And they taught me a lot about trademark. And I was always astounded, even working at Mattel Toys, that Marvel and DC had been awarded joint custody of what to me was a generic term of superhero. Always blew my mind. I used to talk about it with the trademark attorneys at Mattel all the time. And so this last month, they found themselves with their trademarks voided, basically, by the USPTO, the United States Patent and Trademark Office. And I could not be happier about this because it was a ridiculous thing to have had joint ownership over basically an entire descriptor, a genre, rather. That's like saying I own the word mystery. You know what I mean? Right. It was just bonkers stupid. And so I am so glad and happy for all of us, especially for my friend Brad Guigar, who can now market with the word superhero.
Yeah. That's something that is surprisingly pertinent, right? It's very good to be able to do that. And also it's a good thing to keep in mind, because one thing that that I always kind of shrug when something like this happens, I go, well, the person who's got the biggest lawyers win, right? And Marvel and DC ostensibly have big lawyers, but the way this came about was that a small company that produced a series called Super Babies Comics, which was a comic about superhero babies. The creator S.J. Reichold decided to challenge the two comics giants' claim. That does not sound like a corporate juggernaut, right?
No, it does not.
It was just somebody who went in kind of a breath of fresh air moment for American pop culture. Somebody just went in and made a very, very good argument and said, you can't. And by the way, I also think that the reason I'm extra happy about this is after Marvel and DC successfully did that, you saw a number of other corporate entities try a similar overstep by copywriting some other very broad terms.
My favorite was when Disney tried to trademark Dia de los Muertos, which is like Day of the Dead in Spanish. And everyone was like, what the hell? No, you can't trademark a holiday.
That's like trademarking Christmas, you know?
Exactly.
So very, very happy to find out that happened. That was very good news.
And you know, it's fun for because it also had required of indies like Image or IDW or Brad Guigar that they use stupid phrases for 30 or 40 years, like soups or capes or powered heroes. And now we can just get rid of all of that and just say superheroes again. It was and by the way, in reading through the articles about it, I had not realized that Marvel and DC not only had superhero, but they had like 4 or 5 variations of that, which I had not realized. Anyway, the whole thing was so stupid. The whole idea of a trademark was that it's one entity controlling a mark for use in their trade and in their marketing, right? And so the idea that 2 competitors, and frankly, at the time when they were granted this, 2 monopolistic competitors could be granted it jointly over a super tenuous, broad descriptor of a phrase of a genre. It was just a stupid filing. And I'm really glad that the USPTO has corrected themselves on that.
It was the definition of collusion, in my opinion. But Dave, you also have another update for the show today. And I'm looking at it on the list and oh my God, I am here for it.
Yeah, so we're going to move away from things that go against the Sherman Act, and we're going to go on to a different item. I had a thing that I wanted to bring up to Brad because I have been thinking about this since someone came up to me on social media. That's a funny way to phrase it. Since someone came to me on social media saying, "Oh, I don't get this joke," and I wanted to ask Brad, and I think I know what your answer is. Is there ever a world, Brad, where Brad Guigar explains a joke when someone says, "I don't get it"?
No, never. In fact, I would very, very strongly advise anyone listening, you do not want to get into that. You do not answer that question. You don't, for 110 reasons. I'll give you 2 right off the top of my head. Number 1, you don't want to encourage that kind of response. And you got to realize that a lot of people are looking to you as somebody that they might like as an entertainer, and they want to have an interchange, want to have an engagement with you in some way. And this is not the engagement that you want to encourage, right? The I don't get it engagement. That is not what you want to encourage. And also, number 2, it's an unwinnable, untenable position because at no time has anybody ever really laughed at a joke once it was explained to them. Really, what they're kind of doing is putting you in a position where they say, I think you failed. Now I'm going to torture you with it. I'm going to rub your nose in it. I'm going to punish you by making you explain this joke to me. And I don't let people treat me like that. So I hope you didn't respond to this person on social media, Dave.
No, I did not. And much like you, I was sort of just curious because we hadn't talked about this in a long time. And like you, I could go down a long list of reasons why I don't explain a joke. One, that Brad didn't touch it's that old trope of, explaining a joke is like dissecting a frog. Well, like, okay, yeah, now you know how the joke works, but you have a dead frog, And so there's that. But then there's also, like Brad said, the onus is being put on you unfairly most generally, because it's like George Carlin said, the average person is pretty stupid, but now you got to figure out that, half the people are dumber than that. And so you're always going to be, if you establish this as a pattern, you're always going to be explaining to some moron. Right. Well, see, the dog in this case represents capitalism, or, whatever it is with your joke. And you're like, all right, it drains your battery. So what I like to do is I like to do a gentle, like, hey, we're all in this together, but with a little sting, like, ha ha, well, you can't win them all, or ha ha, well, you'll get it next time, or, that kind of thing. Just a little something to be like, I'm not answering that. And also, why are you putting this on me? Because it's interesting in terms of, like, a stand-up comedian knows right away when something isn't working, right? Like they have either laughter or silence, or laughter or tepid claps, and then they know if a joke didn't work. We're looking at social media, and for the most part, you could have 9,999 people quietly to you, completely loving a joke, but then the one person coming at you with the I don't get it. And holy hell, can that sour your day. So if you encourage that sort of thing, and then the next day you have 5 people saying, oh, I didn't get this one. And then the next day after that, you have 15 people saying, I don't get this one. You want to shut that down right quick. You do not want to have to explain, and you don't want to build up a pattern of people saying, oh, it's okay to go to Brad Guigar going, I didn't get this one.
Yeah, well, that's just it. Every great comedian that like a stand-up comedian, let's take stand-up comedians in for this example. Every great stand-up comedian, every joke they told had a certain number of people in the audience who did not get the joke, right? But those people didn't stand up and say, I don't get it, right? They just, in fact, it's just the opposite. And the only time a stand-up knows that they failed is if they get crickets and they die up there. And that's because nobody got it. But every joke they told up until that point, a certain percentage, it always broke down. And have I ever talked to you about the motorcycle jump theory of comedy?
No, please talk to me about this. What is this?
So here's how I think about this when I'm trying to build a joke. Every joke is a motorcycle jump, and you've got a big ravine. You've got land on one side, almost like Wile E. Coyote. Land on the left, a big hole that you can fall into and kill yourself, and then land on the right. Okay, and you got to get and the wider the chasm, the funnier the joke. I can have a very narrow chasm, but that's not a very funny joke. And in fact, if the motorcyclist can just step over the chasm and leave his motorcycle behind, it's not a very funny joke.
Yeah, it's like when I do a dad joke at dinner. Yeah, I get it.
Right.
Yeah.
And the wider the chasm, the funnier the joke. Now, in order for the joke to land, literally and figuratively, a whole lot of things have to happen, including the person on the landing side of the chasm has to know a certain amount of things about what you're talking about. In other words, if you're talking, my brother-in-law, who is literally a rocket scientist for NASA, can tell a joke about math that I don't get because I don't have the requisite information in my head about applied mathematics at the NASA level. It's a very funny joke to the right audience, but to me, and so now with that in mind, picture on the right-hand side of your screen, you've got a ramp that the audience builds, and each audience member builds their own ramp based on their knowledge, what they know, what they understand, what they've experienced, what they've lived. That's their ramp for that one joke. That's their ramp. You've got a ramp on your side, and you're building your ramp based on how you position the joke, how you tell the joke, how you've written that joke, how you've done the setup, how you've done the punchline. All of those things is on your ramp, and a really, really well-built ramp on your side can propel that motorcyclist over a very, very long distance of the chasm. You can do great just by your wording choices, how you built up your speed, how you've done the tension and release. But if the person on the right-hand side of the chasm doesn't have a ramp, that motorcyclist is going to fall into the chasm. Right? Or if the ramp
and that's
is short,
not on you as a motorcyclist to build that ramp for them. Yeah.
And so every joke that doesn't land, again, literally and figuratively, you've got to go back and break that down.
How did we get 6 years through this show and you've never shared this with me? This is great.
This is the mental image that is in my head every time. Literally, I can't believe I've never talked to you about this.
This is so good and so solid. I'm listening to this wrapped because I'm like, oh, this is a great way to describe it. Yes.
I want to do an animation about this particular lecture so badly, and I just don't have the skills. Yes. But it's like you can build your ramp really, really well, and if that other person just doesn't like me, like my brother-in-law and me, I don't have a ramp for math jokes. I just don't. So he could ostensibly tell his joke the best way that it could possibly be told. That motorcyclist is still gonna fall in the chasm but another guy with a better ramp for that particular joke is gonna love it. That motorcyclist lands and everybody cheers. That is, for me, the essence of comedy. The width of the chasm, the quality of your ramp on the left, and the quality of that one person's ramp on the right. And if you're certain that you built your ramp well, you cannot take umbrage. You cannot feel bad about the quality of the ramp on the right, because that's the one part of this that you really can't control.
Yeah. So let me put on my creator hat for a minute to say, out of 5,000, 6,000 Sheldon jokes, Have there been times where I absolutely failed to build my motorcycle ramp well,
Yes.
and I did not have enough speed, and I did not construct it. I didn't do my line art well. My word choice was bad. My character posing was not perfect.
You got into your head?
Yeah, my diction was off. My pacing was off. I didn't land it from a joke standpoint. The fault was mine, right? But if I do everything right and it still doesn't land, and someone comes at me with the I don't get it.
Yeah.
Here's a little bit what's happening is that if I read a joke, now I'm taking off my creator hat as Dave Kellett, I'm putting on my reader hat. If I'm online or social media or on Reddit Comics or at a comic book shop and I read a joke and it doesn't land with me, you have to have the emotional wherewithal to go, hey, you know what? Not every joke is for me.
Right.
This is clearly a joke for someone with a different lived experience, and I can probably nail who the lived experience is for. Yeah. You know, so even though I don't get it, I get the sort of brass tacks of where the joke was going. Or, you know, I get this structurally, this is a beautiful joke. It's just not for me because I don't really know all that much about, you know, Brazilian history. So it's not, this joke is not for me. And so the average person online, myself included, goes, okay, it's not for me. I'll just keep scrolling. Yeah. But there's a weird tiny subset of people online that are like, they assume that every joke has to be for them. Yes. And if it wasn't discriminated by them, then it must have failed as a joke. And by God, they need to let the cartoonist know that. And that is a weird subset online.
Yeah, there are certain places where that is encouraged, right? Like the critique channel on the ComicLab Discord. That's where we get into the weeds on ramp building, right? Sure. That's where we talk about, oh, could you have built that ramp better? And also, it's what we warn about. It's one of the reasons that we tell people, once you've written something, you've got to let it sit for a few days to see if it's funny, because you're in your head right now and you think that everybody has the same ramp that you do. That you think that these ramps are common knowledge on the right-hand side, and they're not. It's just because you've been thinking about this thing for so long, it's all in your head.
You'll see that in Brad and I when we do Writer's Room on Pro Tips. Brad often says, okay, we've been talking about this topic for 25 minutes. Yeah. Let's revisit it as though we're coming at it fresh because we've been talking about it for 25 minutes. So let's look at it as though it's a carte blanche, right? And so just as an example of when that happens, someone might be coming at this joke with a very different approach than you who've been thinking about it and working on it for weeks.
Right. Well, we're gonna put that to the test. Remember, Dave, we did a Pro Tips last week. We could not find the joke. And I said, we've been talking about it too long. And I said, you know what, Dave, we always tell people to walk away and come back. Yep. And so that's what we did. And when we're done recording this show, we're going to record the next one. And we're going to come back to that very topic and see. Have you been thinking about it this week? No, I can tell because you just looked in your phone to see what the joke is. I can see what you're doing. No, but that's perfect. Dave, that's what you're supposed to do. We're not supposed to look at it at all. No prep. Yeah. And then we're going to go and take and record this next show and see if now that we've gone away from it, got into a different head, if we can find the funny. Yeah, but you're right. Yeah, but at no point is an I don't know outside of a critique channel or something like that. At no point is it. Here's the thing, Dave. I really got like into this one time with somebody. Have you ever met a person that said, you know what? I don't have a very good sense of humor. Have you ever met somebody who said that?
No.
Unless you're talking about a very special person. Everybody insists that they've got a great sense of humor.
Here's the thing. Everyone insists they have a great sense of humor and that their taste in music is great.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But it takes a really special person to be like, oh no, I don't know jokes, I don't know comedy, I don't know humor, I'm not good at it. I will say this about my taste in music. I kind of think that I might have terrible taste in music. I'm being quite sincere about that. Yeah. And Brad's driven with me. He can probably attest to that.
There's only so many Irish jigs you can listen to until you go, you know. I had no idea they had an electronic jug band. That was something else. I
got to tell you, that electronic jug band was great.
The washboard player I liked, but no. So you got to realize that everybody's got a different sense of humor. Yep. They all think that they've got a great sense of humor because they're only counting every time the motorcyclist landed on their point on their part, right? They don't count the ones that didn't. They blame you for that. That means you're not a good writer. Not that they're not a person with a good sense of humor. They can't see it any other way, right?
Yeah.
So you've got to see it for them. And that doesn't mean pointing it out to them or any of that other stuff. I refuse to respond to an I don't know. And I will let my audience come in and do it for me if they want to, because some of them love being the person that knows. Hey, I know, I'm going to explain it to you, right? Well, great. That's engagement. That'll, that I never turn down engagement, but I don't get involved in it. And I suggest you don't either. Don't get involved in it. I don't know.
Yeah, my big takeaway from this is that it's not good for your own mental game as a creator to focus on the one person that it didn't work for. It really is not. It's not good for your confidence, because so much of writing is comfort and confidence and ease as you go into your writing. Not like, it didn't work last time. Oh, I'm failing. What am I doing wrong? That will not produce good writing. So I try to ignore those people and to not respond, as does Brad.
Yeah, there's one thing I do respond to.
What's that?
There's a few, a compliment I'll respond to, a kind word I'll respond to.
Good job, handsome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And you know what?
You did light up.
I did. Yeah, and there's one more thing I'll respond to, and that is when the clock on the wall has spun an entire hour, I'll respond by saying you've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
And I, in turn, will respond by saying your hosts have been my friend Brad Guigar, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evilcomic.com.
And my close personal friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. You may hear your review featured on a future episode. And thank you so much for those 5-star reviews over on Spotify. You're keeping us right at the very top, and that is getting this show out to a lot of people who need to hear it. And we thank you so much for that.
And Comic Lab is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So we'll go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/don't drive behind me in a giant Ford Explorer as I try to get through LA.
I deserve praise.
You deserve. Then you'll get it from me, Brad. You deserve.
I deserve praise because I want you to know, on the cold open, you said that Gloria got rear-ended, and I said nothing. I sat very quietly.
Oh my God! Who is the saint among us? Who is the saint that walks among us? It's Brad Guigar.
Thank you. You have no idea how hard I was holding back on that, and I didn't say anything because I did not want to impugn upon your beautiful wife. But God, that was so hard letting that line drop.
Let's give Brad his tiara and flowers, everyone. He did it. He passed the test. Wave to the crowd, Brad, with the queenly wave because you did it. Brad Guigar, the best among us.